Hi. Eventually I did get to Tottenham Technical College and start my A-level course. I was doing three subjects, uh, computer science, maths and sociology. Sociology was a washout. I don't think they had anyone to teach the course. They gave you a few book titles and it was up to you to work it out for yourself, which nobody did. Maths, well, that gets a bit hard. I mean, I was good at arithmetic and algebra and geometry, but then it just gets harder, and you start getting things like trigonometry and calculus and stuff. And well, if you miss a lesson or two, you really lose your train, and you can never really put it back together again. I think I did have a vague idea how it worked, and I probably would have scraped through the end of year exam. The third subject was computer science, and computer science then was in its infancy. I mean, a computer then, which probably had about the same computing power as your average pocket calculator, would take up rooms and rooms of machinery and tape recorders and flashing lights and card readers and all sorts of things. And it was fed either by a paper tape which had holes punched into it and was encoded in that way, or in our case, we had a computer somewhere we could use which took punch cards. So there were little pieces of cardboard with holes in, and your program, which we all had to write, would be translated into these a stack of these cards, which would be fed into the computer. I think the idea came from a Jacquard loom originally, and I don't really think it had progressed much past that. But I liked the subject, and I was relatively good at it, and who knows where it would have led. Maybe I'd have been the next Bill Gates or something, I don't know. But it wasn't to be. Life intervened. What you've got to remember is that it was 1969, I think, and the Summer of Love had been 1967. We had bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix. There was the Isle of Wight Festival that everybody except me went to. There was Woodstock, I think it happened. People were flocking to San Francisco and growing their hair long and expressing themselves in all kinds of creative ways. And of course, people were experimenting with drugs. And was I experimenting? Of course I was. I was like everybody else. I was quite careful with which drugs I experimented with. I steered clear of anything that was addictive, opiates and amphetamines and the like. I experimented with LSD. I took a few tabs of acid, not all at once, of course, and I will say that is a very profound experience. It's life-changing, revelatory. It's almost like a religious experience if you're that way inclined. But it wasn't for me. I found it a little bit overwhelming, and I didn't pursue it. My drug of choice was cannabis resin, which at the time was available in resin form, and it was Well, I know that it can be harmful to some people, and I do know that it causes or it can trigger uh, psychotic episodes, and certainly some people would be better off if they didn't try it. But is it a gateway drug? Not really. Maybe it's a gateway to innocent fun. In my case, most of the people I knew smoked and smoked cannabis, and it didn't really seem to do them very much harm. But at some point, while I was at the cemetery, I think I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and all of a sudden there was a bang on the door, and the door flew in, and all these people with these burly people in cheap suits came pouring in, and the room was full of policemen and a few women, I think, and the house was being raided, and I was found to have a very small quantity of cannabis in my pocket, and as a result ended up in front of Highgate Magistrate, who gave me a bit of a ticking off and told me not to do it again and fined me a fairly modest amount. I'm probably getting on for a week's wages, but not a huge amount of money. So I just kind of took that in my stride and put it behind me and carried on. And then I started at Tottenham Tech. Well, as I said before, I would probably have scraped through the final exams, the end of year exams, which would have given me access to the second year of the course. But I was unfortunate again. Life intervened again. This time I was coming out of a sweet shop in Tottenham, minding my own business, and two big burly men in cheap suits again confronted me and went through my pockets and found that I indeed was carrying a very small amount of cannabis resin. They took me off to Tottenham Police Station, where I was charged and bailed, and I knew that I would come up in front of the magistrate again in some time in the future. So I thought, worried about it a bit. Of course, it was a second offence, but the usual form was to get a slightly increased fine. So I was bracing myself for that. Eventually I got a court date, and I went to Tottenham Magistrates Court and came up in front of a man called Mr. Turner. Now, he was a narrow-minded, vindictive little man and was probably not having a very good life, and he had read somewhere, probably in the gutter press, that what young people needed was a short, sharp shock. So that's what he gave me. And instead of a fine, I was sent away for 3 weeks on remand, pending reports. And the reports would be, during the time you were on remand, you'd see a psychiatrist, you'd have an intelligence test, and you'd probably get some kind of report from the warders, which I knew nothing about. But whatever it was, when I eventually came back, my reports weren't really, well, they didn't help. Anyway, that's another story. I'll tell you about that later. First of all, Ashford Remand Centre. It was a prison for young people, people under 21, which was the age of majority then. And there were a mixture of people there. Most of them should have been somewhere else. They needed help rather than prison. There were a few genuine nutcases who should have been locked up somewhere else, preferably not near me. There were quite a few people like myself who were there for minor drug offences or minor crimes. I think one person was there for trying to obtain a free phone call. How petty can you get? Anyway. And I was stuck in a cell. There were 3 people in the cell, 2 people with me. One was a young black man who was a sort of man-child, really. He was 17 years old, and he had the body of a man but the mind of a child. And he committed some meaningless crime like stealing a motor scooter or joyriding or something of that sort. I rubbed along with him okay, but he wasn't a great friend. But the other guy in the cell was a guy called Roy Webb, who was a professional criminal, a thief, who'd learnt his trade from his father, who was also a thief. And he made a living by breaking into shops and warehouses and places like that, and stealing goods and selling them to people he knew, his contacts. And inevitably he was caught. It wasn't the first time he was caught. He probably should have been doing something else, but once you've gone down that criminal path, it's very difficult to turn back. Anyway, he was quite a nice person. In fact, I could get along well with him, and it was good to have somebody who had experience of being in prison and taught me the ropes, and I felt safe that he was there. And well, what was prison like? Well, if you've ever seen an episode of Porridge, it was a bit like that, without the good humour and bonhomie, and with an added sense of danger and sporadic violence. So, and I remember it in black and white, because everything was painted grey and the clothes you wore were either black or white, and there wasn't any colour or any beauty or anything about it. It was just a miserable waste of time. We were taken out periodically every day to do some kind of mundane task, like unwrapping the copper from GPO equipment, or polishing the corridor, or cleaning the toilets. That was quite a regular chore, because of course when you got 3 people to a cell, which was really designed for one person, you have quite a lot of toilet cleaning to do. Anyway, we got a wage for that, which was a paltry sum. I can't remember exactly how much, but it was enough to buy half an ounce of Old Holborn tobacco, a packet of cigarette papers, and a box of matches. And if you were lucky, you had a sharp blade somewhere secreted, whereby you could cut the matches in half, make them go twice as far. But half an ounce of tobacco for a week is not very much, and tobacco was the main currency in the prison. Everybody was always on the scrounge for a fag, and well, I used my full amount, and I didn't have any to spare. But if you didn't smoke, you could be a king, because you could have your half ounce of tobacco and you could use it as currency. Anyway, eventually I had these reports done. I took an intelligence test. I saw a psychiatrist, and I had a report done by the warders, which I had no idea what it was. But obviously the reports weren't very helpful to me. perhaps I shouldn't have argued with the psychiatrist, who I tried to persuade that there was a difference between what was moral and what was legal. And it was a futile argument, and I think she was keen to get off to the toilet rather than talk to me. The intelligence test, well, I probably did too well in that. I proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was intelligent enough to know better. And so when I went back to court with these reports, I clearly wasn't very repentant, and I wasn't very stupid, and so in the eyes of Mr. Turner, I deserved further punishment. So he sentenced me to 3 months detention centre. And the detention centre was like a borstal, but without the vocational training. It was just you spent 3 months being shouted at by men in peak caps and doing everything at the double, and probably having very poor food. But the food in Ashford was appalling. It consisted of mashed potatoes that invariably had green lumps in them, greens that were actually boiled so that they were grey, and the meat was a kind of slimy, scum-covered. I don't know what it was. I couldn't eat it anyway. I lost about a stone and a half in 3 weeks. So I recommend it as a diet plan. Go to prison, lose weight, you will. We also had white bread smeared with margarine, which tasted like candle fat. And at the end of the day, as a big treat, we got a mug of tea and a piece of bread pudding. I don't suppose there were many takers on the sliced white bread that we got at lunchtime, so I guess they had a lot of surplus bread and made it into bread pudding. You were lucky if you got a raisin or a sultana in it. I don't think, but you might have had some. You were lucky if you saw one. And we had that with a big mug of tea, so it was quite a cheery supper. And then you went to sleep. So anyway, I was sentenced to this 3 months extra detention. Luckily, by that time, I had a solicitor who had the wit to appeal on my behalf. And my appeal was allowed, and eventually I saw some real judges in Middlesex Quarter Sessions, and I had a big reassuring barrister who spoke on my behalf, and he said, I think this Mr. Turner has been a little harsh in this case. The judges agreed with him, and they reduced my sentence from detention to what would you call it, kind of supervision, probation, that's the word. I was put on probation, and well, that was a little bit inconvenient, but the thing to do when you get on probation is get a job, because that's what it's there for, to try and set you onto an even keel. Luckily, when I was at Tottenham Tech, I had a Saturday job, and I worked in the bookmaker's City Tote, writing up the results onto a chalkboard which they had on display for the customers, so that they could see the results, and I wrote them up as they came over the radio. And so when I needed a job, which I clearly wasn't going to get a job in maths or computing anymore, I looked to City Tote, and I got a job straight away with them, and that turned the page on the next chapter of my life, which was working for City Tote. But that's another story, and I shall tell you that in my next video.